Welcome back. I've had a number of questions recently about the magnetic sensation at the spiritual eye, so I wanted to go over Lahiri Mahasaya's 3 knots and dedicate one video just to Lahiri Mahasaya's 3 knots. There are many other places where you may hear about knots in the chakras, in different points within the body regarding meditation. But Lahiri Mahasaya, in his description of these 3 knots, is very, very precise in that they are experienced in a downward progression. That kind of seems opposite from the perceived goal of meditation, which is to raise the consciousness up the body into the higher nervous system. So it's a really profound thing, and it's really extremely valuable because you're not going to hear this anywhere else. So let's get into it. So the two things that you might hear me say on this channel the very most are, one, go into heart rate variability, resonant breathing, and number two, chant Om at each of the chakras mentally. And those two things are probably the most powerful thing that you can do for meditation on the face of the planet. You could do Khechari Mudra, which is to place the tongue inside the nasal passage and touch the sphenoid sinus. Now, I have videos on this. That's also very powerful. But if you're only going to do that, you'll be missing out on this whole world of heart rate variability and Om Japa in the chakras. That world is glorious and beautiful. And everybody who on this channel tries out the heart rate variability breathing, they all come back and they say, oh my God, this is amazing. Because it is. That's the threshold into internal experience, is that heart rate variability. We have to lower the natural idle of the body. We have to lower it down and get everything quiet. And that quietness in the body reflects back on the mind, and the mind gets quiet. And that's the threshold of interior experience. To understand all of this and to understand Lahiri's 3 knots, we have to begin to understand the chakras. And you've probably heard me say this before. We have a limbic brain. That's that old brain. The lizard brain is part of that. So it's the lizard brain. So if you hear of the 3-brain theory, the 3-brain theory says that you have a lizard brain at the core, which is primarily the medulla oblongata and the pons. And then built on top of that is a whole new structure, which is called the mammalian brain. And the mammalian brain has all the parts, the limbic system. Built on top of all of that is the gray matter. When you think of the brain and you get a picture of a gray brain, that's the gray matter on top. That's what we usually think of when we think of the brain. And in our practice, it's not as important as that limbic system, that limbic brain. That's primarily important for us. And that system of the limbic brain is full of our memories. It's full of the meaning of our lives. It's full of emotional content in our own history and how that comes together. And so all of that limbic material is projected through the central nervous system into the body. So let's give an example of this so this makes sense, okay? So somebody comes to me and they say something to me, and it's just an electrical signal that my ear picks up, right? And it goes inside of that mammalian brain, the limbic system, and my filters that create my personality listen to the words that were said to me, and they say, oh my God, this is hurtful. And the limbic system, like referring pain. So what is referred pain? So you have kidneys. Let's say you have, God forbid, you have a kidney stone. Your kidneys don't have sense receptors to pick up on that pain, and so they will refer the pain to some other area in the body, probably the lower back. You'll feel it back there, and you'll have incredible back pain. but it's not coming from the back. It's coming from the stone, which is inside the channel between the kidney and the bladder. And so that's referred pain. Same thing happens with a heart attack. God forbid. A heart attack happens, the heart doesn't have sense receptors, and so refers that pain to some other part of the body so that we can be aware of the problem. And your brain works the same exact way. So you have this signal in the brain, and the brain interprets it because of our filters as being hurtful. And so the limbic brain doesn't have anything to do with that hurt feeling except to project it into the body. And so it projects it straight into the heart, and you say, oh, I feel heartache from what you said. But it's just a projection of the limbic brain, you see. And it's the same with fear in the gut. It's the same with sex way down below. It's the same with words stuck in our throat. And it's the same with visions and dreams in the Ajna chakra, which is just at the medulla and above. And so all of this projected material we call chakras, right? In the yogic system, we call those chakras. And they're just a bunch of referred material from the limbic brain. It's not actually a real thing. It's a projection, like a holographic projection down into the body. And so when we do Om Japa, we are sending it like a mental bomb, a little bomb of Om straight into the chakra to kind of cancel out that projection so that all of the energy naturally comes right back to the brain. That's a pretty deep study of the chakras right there. So as we interiorize with heart rate variability breathing, that's our biggest handle in the room to create the very most change, is that heart rate variability. Once you get that cooking in the body, you're going to see deep interiorization. And as that happens, things which are unconscious in the body start to become conscious, like your heartbeat. You might become aware of your heartbeat. You might become aware of internal sounds. You might hear the buzzing of a bee or a flute or a harp or a gong. All of these are internal sounds of the nervous system. And you're beginning to hear them because you are interiorizing inside. And so as this process is going on, these chakras also become more apparent. And that's why we want to chant Om into them. We don't want to be swallowed up by these projections, right? We want to silence them as easily and effectively as we can. So that's the why of Om Japa. So as these things become more and more conscious, and our interior situation becomes more and more conscious, the processes of the limbic brain, which were before completely unconscious, become more apparent. And when that process is very deep, we become aware of this chakra system in a downward progression, first by the knot at the Ajna chakra. And Lahiri Mahasaya refers to this as the tongue knot because he taught all of his students Khechari Mudra. And he wanted them to very slowly and very easily stretch out the tongue and then finally place it into the nasal pharynx. And he knew that would give them the experience of the first knot, which is the magnetic sensation at the Ajna chakra. So you can feel it in front of the forehead, at the spiritual eye, at the third eye. You could feel it at the medulla. You can feel it in the center of the brain. And I've said before, we don't want to make war on the brain. But when you practice everything that I'm talking about, heart rate variability and Om Japa at the chakras, this happens spontaneously. So things that happen spontaneously, they're okay, but you don't want to make war on the brain, as I've said before. But when it happens as an after effect, well, what can you do? That's just part of the program, right? That magnetic sensation, which you'll most likely feel at the third eye, which kind of draws you very strongly. It will draw up your eyes, it'll draw your attention, it'll draw up your energy up into the head. That magnetic sensation is the very first knot that Lahiri talks about, and it's going down in a downward progression because the next one is the heart. So you can feel that your head. There's a lot of energy coming into your head. You can feel like it's swollen. You can feel that magnet at the spiritual eye. You might see the light of the spiritual eye. You might see the gold. You might see it as white. You might just see a deepening darkness, like looking into a cave. You might see it as blue. You might see it as a deep, deep indigo blue. You might see the star of the spiritual eye. All of this is possible. Any piece of that is possible. And all of those are indicators that you're looking at the spiritual eye and that magnet has come alive. And you're really making the unconscious conscious. And so it's drawing you very strongly into the brain because you're silencing everything out. And so you're going back into the brain. The energy, which has been cast down, automatically is going back. Makes perfect sense, right? And so the next sensation is the heart knot. So this is the downward progression, right? It starts here, and then suddenly your heart may break open wide. And when this happens, there's a number of things that can happen. So you can feel something at the heart, perhaps, or all of a sudden your whole body, you may experience it as energy rather than a physical body. The first time that this happened to me, I had done a very long meditation, and I thought for whatever reason, I just thought I'd lay down on my floor for a while. So I lay down on the carpet, and I went into a very deep relaxation, and all of a sudden, it felt as if someone had picked me up and was blowing me like a flute, just and waving through my whole body was this wavy energy. And I no longer felt solid. I didn't feel solid at all. It was very, very strange the first time. My whole body felt like a wave of energy. So these are the kind of sensations that may overcome you when the heart knot is opening. You may feel that the whole body is like a shell, and inside is swimming this energy. That's another possibility. So that's the heart knot. And then finally, all the way down at the coccyx, the coccyx knot may begin to spiral. And you can feel it perhaps spiral in the coccyx. You might see the spiral in the spiritual eye. And I've even felt like my whole world was spinning and turning. That really freaked me out. I came home, had worked like a dog all day. My body was so tired. I sat down to meditate, and all of a sudden, my breathing became extremely shallow and seemed to disappear. And then suddenly, the whole room began to spiral. And I opened up my eyes, and I expected, it felt like God had picked up the earth and was just spinning it like a top, like it was a toy for a child. And I opened my eyes, and I fully expected the whole room to be spinning around me. And it wasn't. Of course, it was all an internal experience, an introspection of that final knot, the coccyx knot, when everything starts to spin. So again, this is a projection of the limbic brain. It's not a real thing. You're not going to find it in the body. It's a projection. So the mind, the brain, can project it anywhere that it would like to. And so, like I'm saying, it's an archetypal experience, and there's many ways that you could possibly experience it. So those are Lahiri's 3 knots. And it's entirely possible that you feel one, and then you miss the next one, and then the next one you feel. That's entirely possible. It really depends on how comfortable and relaxed you are in meditation. One of the cornerstones of meditation is that we sit very still. And that's one of the reasons that it's a good idea to stretch before you sit down to meditate. And that stretching will help to relax the body, elongate the muscle fibers so that they more easily sit and relax. So that's why Lahiri had a whole system that he invited his students to practice. It was a set system which would, like a recipe, which would produce the cake of samadhi. That's the whole idea with Lahiri Mahasaya's recipe, is that you follow the recipe and you come out with the same cake that he does. as you progress in these 3 knots, the first knot may become more and more intense. And if it becomes so intense, I reached one point where I was afraid to talk about anything spiritual, because as soon as I started talking with my friends about spiritual matters, the magnet at the spiritual eye became so powerful that it felt like my brain was going to split in half. It was really overpowering. And I didn't have this advice, which I'm giving to you, to take that magnetic sensation and very gently draw it back to the medulla oblongata. And how do you find that medulla? You just find that point where the neck inserts into the skull, and you just don't engage these muscles, just back and forth, and feel that point in the medulla, that little screw that's going into the skull. That's your medulla oblongata. So draw that magnetic sensation back into that medulla, and that will help you to stabilize. It's a much better place to experience that magnetic sensation. It's much more tolerable in that location. Or you can take that magnetic sensation and you can expand it. Think of expansion. Pick a point in front of you and expand. Dilate your eyes and expand that sensation. And that will help to induce the right hippocampus. And that's what we want. In deep, deep meditation, we want to enter into the right hippocampus. And so that magnetic sensation, it's kind of like you knocking on the door of the right hippocampus, but you can't just run in. You have to induce that sensation of letting go and expansion, which is the right hippocampus. So you have to put your brain in the right spot in order to go into the right hippocampus. And that's what these 3 sensations are all about. They are the downward progression of introception, which happens archetypally to pretty much every meditator. Now, it's possible the whole thing happens so fast that you didn't notice it. But if you go slowly, you'll probably notice eventually, at some point in your meditations, this downward progression, which Lahiri Mahasaya called the 3 knots. So I'm so happy to present this to you. When I first felt these experiences, oh my God, they freaked me out, all of them. They all freaked me out. And so it's so nice to share it with you so that you can have the knowledge and you can be prepared when it does happen to you in meditation. It's completely natural. You're just changing the internal unconscious into the internal conscious. And as that happens, we experience this downward progression of the chakras as they're going back home into the brain, into specifically the right hippocampus. So I hope you loved this. I hope it was extremely valuable. If it was, hit that bell down below so I can see you all next time.